Let me also say how happy I am to be here tonight for your annual meeting. Civic associations are what makes Virginia special, what makes Arlington special. That's sometimes hard for an Alexandria guy to acknowledge Arlington in the Arlington way. But Colonel, thank you for your comments. And it's great to see so many folks from both the police and fire department here. This is going to be a town hall, so I'm going to actually not be senatorial and filibuster forever. I want to make a few quick comments about kind of a couple things we're working on the Hill, and an idea that I've been working on, we'll to get some feedback on, and then this is your opportunity. You can have at me on any issue, anything you want, question, complaint, concern. Since I just got recently rehired, I'll tell you the whole truth. But let me go ahead and get started so we can get, I know, to the part that you want with questions and comments. How many of you here are current or former federal employees? Pretty good number. Be worried. Not so much in terms of, I'll get to sequestration in a minute, but one of the things that I'm on Intel, so I can't say everything, but this recent data breach at OPM is extraordinarily serious. And it will be even probably more serious than has been revealed to date. This coming on top of another data breach that happened about 9 months ago at USIS, one of the government contractors that has part of the data, really concerns me enormously. As Director Comey at the FBI said, literally every company in America has either they've been breached by the Chinese or just don't know that they've been breached by the Chinese. And this is an area that is going to be increasingly a personal security threat, a national security threat, and quite honestly, I don't think as a federal government we ought to act again. We don't have the kind of information sharing between private sector and public sector that we need. We don't have we've passed, this is not really a Democrat-Republican issue, this is just, in my mind, a common sense issue. And as Paul mentioned, and some of you know, my background was in technology. I was the cell phone guy, so again, that makes me the only politician that even when I'm speaking, leave your cell phones on. Doesn't bother me at all. I just go down to the next one. But as a former technology guy, it really worries me a great deal that our country, in terms of cybersecurity, is not fully prepared or fully protected. And again, there will be more to come in the next week or so in some of the press, but this is an area where we need a single portal of information so that all governmental agencies, federal, state, and local, can collaborate on this issue so that we've got some safe haven for private sector companies who want to share information. But this is an area of enormous concern. We'd be happy to take questions or comments. That's one of the things we're working on right now. We've got the Defense Authorization Bill up on the floor of the Senate now. We in Virginia do pretty well in that piece of legislation. But let me state at the outset, while we do pretty well, we are in a completely untenable position at this point. Not just vis-a-vis our military, but quite honestly, vis-a-vis all our domestic priorities as well. How stupid is sequestration? Remember, sequestration was set up to be so stupid that no rational people would let it happen. And our economy has come back a little bit because we've had a 2-year hiatus on that. But starting on October 1st of this year, it comes rushing back. And Virginia is disproportionately going to be hit by that if it comes back. We had Director Comey in at Intel today, and one of my colleagues asked him, will you be subject to sequestration? Absolutely. Will the cuts that come on October 1st be challenging? He said they will be devastating. And let me say, while I think it's critically important that we fully fund our military, it's also critically important that we fully fund the FBI and our roads and our education and our NIH. And one of the battles that are going to come up over the next few months is going to be this dance that we've all seen the movie before, where we try to fill in that hole. I'm not going to give you tonight the full debt and deficit budget spiel, other than the fact that the top line, we are just in a financially untenable position. Our revenues are, as a nation at the federal level, or about 17.4% of our GDP. We've never balanced the budget on that. With an aging society, our entitlements and other issues continue to spend more. It's not anybody's fault, it's not Democrat or Republican's fault, but we're now at close to 18 trillion in debt. You want to get a little indigestion? Talk about how much contribution, Patricia, that we're going to need in terms of the next annual event for the federal government, at least in terms of donations of wine and beer. If interest rates go up 1%, which they will, that adds each year $120 billion right off the top. That's more than the Department of Homeland Security spending. And that trumps Medicare, Medicaid, defense spending, just on debt payments. So one of the things that I've worked on for a long time, and will still have to come back to, is how we reform our tax code and how we make sure Medicare and Social Security are going to be here 50 years from now. Right now, we're not sustainable in terms of our balance sheet issues. And again, we can go into as much detail or as little as you'd like on that. I'm sure I can beat you into submission on some of these issues, but it's not going to happen unless both political parties give a little bit. We also, just in terms of the indigestion category, the Highway Trust Fund goes bankrupt in the middle of July. It basically was going to, and again, you can say, well, whose fault is that? The fault is we actually have been successful at raising the fuel standards of our cars. That's great news. But the flip side of that is we've not raised the gas tax since 1992, and so we're driving twice as far and half as much gas, so we're not filling up the coffers of the Highway Trust Fund. And that also partially funds important criteria for a community like Arlington in terms of mass transit. I actually do have some ideas on how we might fill that hole. Aren't ready for, I love you all like brothers and sisters, but I'm not sure, but that would generate some additional revenue that I hope we'll look at rather than continuing to punt. Last comment I want to make before we open the floor, and this is on a new subject, and it's something that is not a current piece of legislation, but it's been something I've been working on for the last 6 months and just want to share a little bit with you. I did a big speech on this last Thursday, and I think tomorrow Tom Friedman's going to write his column about it. Here's my quiz question for tonight. How many of you have heard of the gig economy? The gig economy, or the sharing economy, okay, or the on-demand economy. What we're talking about, for those of you who haven't raised your hand, is the fact that we are in our economy right now. We think about all the technology change Mary went through, the changes in Arlington over the last 20 years. We are going through another fundamental change in the whole nature of work, where we are basically now have, depending on the estimates, anywhere from about 10 million to 53 million of our Americans in our workforce, and that 53 million is almost a third of our workforce, who are contingent workers, 1099 workers. People who either by economic necessity post-recession or by choice are cobbling together 1, 2, or 3 jobs to make enough money to get by. Now, some folks, that has been their way of life for the last 30 years. It's been called being poor or being, not having enough to get by. For a lot of people, though, it's the Uber driver who's also an IT consultant, who also is renting out their home on Airbnb. Airbnb, by the way, how many of you heard of that? Okay, good crowd, good crowd. Airbnb already has more rooms than Marriott. Think about that for a minute. It didn't even exist 5 years ago.
Wow.
But this whole transformation is taking place right in front of us. And we got 25 people running for president, and nobody's talked about it. And what he said, well, what does that have to do with you, Warner, and politics in the Senate? Well, the interesting thing is, this raises a whole series of fundamental changes. The old social contract that used to exist between an employer and employee is basically going away. For those of you who are more in your golden years here, the old idea was you go work for the same company or the government for 30 or 40 years. You may not get rich, but you're going to get health care, and you're going to get a pension, and you're going to get some benefits. That would be kind of the belt and suspenders generation of my father. For me as a baby boomer, our generation was, we didn't get quite as many benefits, but we still had some. And instead of a defined, benefit, we got a defined contribution plan. We became the 401k generation, maybe. But now we've got this transformation coming place, 80 million millennials. Basically anybody who went into the workforce since the year 2000. They are now, for those of us who are baby boomers, Paul, you're a baby boomer. In Gen X, you're kind of right somewhere. But 80 million, okay, you're close enough then. You know, the 80 million baby boomers, we're no longer, or less than 80 million, we're no longer the biggest group. Millennials are now the biggest group, 80 million. And they will be 75% of the workforce in the next 10 years. And what is interesting is, we as policymakers, think about the fact they're not paying unemployment, they're not paying workman's comp. They may be doing great. I see a lot of folks who cobble together 3 jobs in this so-called gig economy, maybe making 100, 150 grand a year, but they're doing great until they're not, and there's nothing that catches them at all when they fall. There's no safety net at all until you come back to, you know, the poverty programs. And it's fundamentally crazy that we're not trying to think through this from a policy standpoint. And final point I'll make, just to kind of close off before we can go to questions, and again, any subject is open game. I talked to the CEO of the Airbnb group the other day. He was out in San Francisco. And he had an interesting thing that took me a while to kind of wrap my head around as a policymaker, politician, whatever, policy wonk, particularly around tax policies. He basically said that his parents' generation, their view of success was own a house, own 2 cars, put your kids through college, and if you're really, really lucky, maybe get a little house at the lake. He says the new generation doesn't even kind of, and Arlington is full of them. It doesn't even think in terms of ownership. They think in terms of sharing. They share that car. They may share their workspace. They want to accumulate experiences. They want to keep their data private. They want to keep a good reputation online. It is a fundamentally different way to think about what our goals and success are. I mean, since we've got basically a tax code and most of our policies are around ownership, yet we may have a generation of people that are moving into a whole different set of success markers. Now, again, I'm not coming here with, and that leads to X, Y, Z, but it sure as heck does mean, for those of us who want Medicare to be there, if we don't have people paying in for those, when Paul gets ready to start collecting in 10 or 12 years, you know, we may not have the kind of promise that we've all managed to enjoy through our lifetime. So a slew of issues, slew of problems. Last point before we open up is just, and what gives me great faith about seeing you all here, even on election night, is that this is still a community that cares. We have an enormous amount of problems in our country. We can all go through all the challenges. The greatest thing is that we still live in the greatest country in the world. We still live in the country that I wouldn't trade our spot for anybody else in the rest of the world. What we could use is a little more rationality where I work. Doesn't matter which political party you belong to, but you know, the idea that we ought to be measured by what we get done rather than simply running down the other side would be a nice change in circumstance. But I say, as somebody who just got rehired, I am very optimistic. Those 80 million millennials are the most diverse, most educated, most tolerant, and most open to disruptive change of any generation in American history. And that's pretty darn good news for all of us. So, Stan, thank you for having me, and now the floor is open for questions, comments, suggestions, criticism.